Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Jude Okoye wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man whose success never replaced a soul. Widowed at 30 after the tragic loss of his wife, his life found new meaning in one place: the laughter of his 7-year-old son, Elijah. Each morning, Jude cooked breakfast himself, tying Elijah's shoelaces before school runs and kissing the boy's forehead with a joy only real fathers understood. His mansion was vast, yet it often felt like a small, warm home when it echoed with Elijah's footsteps. Though he owned one of the largest fintech companies in West Africa, Jude never let his wealth become a barrier between him and humanity. His staff spoke highly of him not just for the salaries he paid, but for his patience, his memory of birthdays, his generosity. His best friend Raymond was more than a business partner. They'd grown up together from the days of shared Gary and lantern-lit nights. Jude trusted him with access to all corners of his empire. And Angela, his girlfriend, had slowly won her way into his heart after years of resisting love. She was smart, elegant, and adored Elijah, or so Jude believed. On the surface, his world was perfect: thriving business, trusted circle, loving son, and a woman who seemed made for him. But behind the laughter and luxury, cracks had begun to form, silent, dangerous cracks that Jude didn't want to admit to himself. Lately, Angela had become increasingly curious about the inner workings of his finances, asking pointed questions about will arrangements, offshore accounts, and the succession plan in the company. Jude had laughed it off at first, mistaking it for curiosity or admiration. Even Raymond, though ever present, had started taking more solo meetings and scheduling off-grid business trips without briefing Jude first, something he'd never done before. The change in energy was subtle, like a quiet cough before a storm, and Jude, being a man who believed deeply in loyalty, ignored it. He was preparing a surprise vacation for Angela and Elijah, something small, intimate, far from the boardrooms and bustle. A private island he'd quietly purchased. He believed Angela had earned it, for standing by him through the early days when he was too broken to love. He didn't know she had her own vacation planned, not with him, but with his most trusted friend. That Thursday morning, Jude drove Elijah to school himself, even though his driver waited at the gate. He told Angela he'd be home before sunset and instructed Raymond to cancel the board meeting for the afternoon. He wore his favorite navy blue Senator wear and gave Elijah a toy camera to document their day like a news reporter. They visited 2 orphanages, donated blankets and food, and Jude gave a speech about building a better world for children. His heart swelled watching Elijah hand out food packs with joy. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to help people too," the boy whispered. Jude smiled, not knowing that these would be the last peaceful words he'd hear from his son for weeks. As they got back into the car, the driver excused himself to grab airtime, but never returned. Jude began to sense something off. The road was oddly empty. He started the car himself, and within moments, the world he built came crashing down. It happened so fast that Jude never saw the first blow coming. As he drove cautiously down the damp road leading to their estate, 2 black SUVs blocked him on both sides. 4 masked men jumped out, guns raised. Jude screamed instinctively, trying to shield Elijah, who had begun crying in confusion. One of the men smashed the window, yanking Jude out by the collar. "Where's your phone? Wallet? Cards," they shouted, beating him across the face with a pistol. Jude, confused and bleeding, begged, "Please, my son is in the car, he's just a child." One of them pointed a gun at Elijah. Jude screamed, "No, don't." But the gun went off. Not a direct shot, more like panic and chaos mixed into one fatal mistake. The bullet pierced Elijah's side. His tiny body crumpled into the back seat, blood quickly soaking through his shirt. Time froze for Jude. He let out a scream that tore the night apart, one of agony no billionaire could bribe his way out of. The robbers vanished into the shadows, taking everything: Jude's car, phone, wallet, and dignity. Left barefoot in the pouring rain, Jude dragged himself to the car, yanked the back door open, and pulled Elijah into his arms. The child was still breathing, faint, shallow, but alive. "Daddy, it hurts," Elijah whispered, his voice a trembling ghost. Jude's tears mixed with the rain as he staggered forward into the night, holding his bleeding son like a dying promise. No one would stop. No one recognized him. No phone. No wallet. No car. The same man whose face appeared in newspapers and national awards was now an anonymous, bleeding father on the road. He screamed for help, waved at passing cars, but people sped past, afraid, suspicious, or indifferent. Every second felt like a nail in his soul. Every heartbeat from Elijah was a fading rhythm he refused to let go. Raymond received a text an hour later while sipping wine in Angela's apartment. It read, "Job done. He won't survive this one. All clear." Raymond smiled faintly and slid the phone into his pocket. Angela asked, "So what now?" He turned to her and said, "We wait. Then we clean up." Neither of them knew that Jude, bloodied, barefoot, and soaked, was still alive, stumbling across the street with Elijah clutched to his chest. Jude didn't know who had betrayed him yet, but a part of his soul screamed that this was no ordinary robbery. It had been too planned, too exact, too familiar. But none of that mattered now. Only one thing mattered: finding a place to save his son before the next breath became his last. Jude staggered toward a brightly lit private hospital whose glowing signage felt like a prayer answered. It was one of the top-rated facilities in the city, a place he had donated over 50 million Nigerian nairas to just the year before. But tonight he was just a barefoot man soaked in blood, holding a nearly lifeless child. He burst through the glass doors, screaming, "Help! Please, someone help my son!" The receptionist looked up, startled. Patients turned their heads. Security guards began to move toward him. Sir, you can't come in like this. Please step outside," the receptionist said, standing up. "My son is dying," Jude shouted, lifting Elijah's limp form for all to see. Blood had soaked through both of their clothes. A nurse stepped forward, but the receptionist blocked her. "No wallet, no name, no ID. We don't even know who he is," she whispered. The nurse hesitated. Jude fell to his knees, still clutching Elijah. "Please. I'll pay anything. Just save my son." A security guard moved closer, hand on his baton. "Oga, you are disturbing peace. Step outside." Another nurse peeked from the corridor, then turned back. A well-dressed man in a lab coat finally walked forward, one of the top doctors in the hospital. He took one glance at Elijah and said coldly, "This child has lost too much blood. Even if we try to save him and he dies here, it will affect our license. You, receptionist, did he check in?" She shook her head. The doctor turned around. "Then he's not our problem." Jude screamed again. "I'm Jude Okoye. But his voice cracked. He collapsed as Elijah began to convulse in his arms. The doctor didn't turn back. Two guards picked him up and dragged him toward the exit. "Sir, you're scaring the patients," one muttered. The receptionist looked on with irritation, as if his pain were an inconvenience. Jude was thrown back into the rain, bruised, shaking, Elijah's breath now fading fast. As the glass doors closed behind him, Jude whispered to himself, "Is this how the world treats fathers who have nothing left?" With trembling feet, he stood again. He would not let Elijah die here. Not like this. Not like a ghost in front of rich men who measured compassion in bank transfers. He walked on, drenched and shivering, searching for another door that might still open. The rain intensified, beating against Jude's skin like a punishment from the heavens. Each step felt heavier, like the ground beneath him was conspiring to drag him down. Elijah was slipping in and out of consciousness, his blood now a darker shade, soaking through his father's shirt and dripping onto the flooded streets. After nearly 20 minutes of stumbling, Jude spotted another hospital, a government-run general hospital known more for volume than excellence. He didn't care. He ran toward the gate, his voice hoarse from screaming. "My son is dying. Please." The security guard, wearing a torn rain poncho and barely awake, pointed toward the emergency entrance lazily. Jude didn't wait for direction. He kicked open the side gate and bolted in, his blood-covered feet leaving red stains on the white tiles. A nurse behind the counter looked up with visible irritation. Yes, she asked, chewing gum as if he were a routine annoyance. My son was shot. Please help, he begged, falling to his knees as Elijah convulsed again. Another nurse emerged and gasped at the sight of the boy. Oh God, this child is critical, she shouted. But just as she began to grab gloves, a stern, elderly male doctor entered from the corridor. What is going on here? He barked. He barged in with a dying child, no records, no file, no documentation, the gum-chewing nurse replied. The doctor, clearly irritated, stared at Jude with disgust. Sir, we have protocols. You cannot just walk in here with a bleeding child and expect miracles. We are not a rescue center. Jude's heart pounded with rage and disbelief. Please, doctor. Please, I'm begging you. I have no phone, no wallet. We were robbed. He's my only child, he sobbed, holding Elijah closer. The doctor stepped forward, inspected Elijah quickly, then stepped back. If this child dies on our table without a name, you people will sue us and ruin our careers. I'm sorry, but we can't help. You need to find somewhere else. Just then, Elijah's body jerked violently. Jude screamed, he's seizing. Please, he's seizing. One of the junior nurses took a step forward, visibly shaken by the child's suffering. But the senior doctor raised his hand. Don't touch him. It's not worth the risk. A cleaner walked past muttering, Nawa, oh, poor people and their walla. Jude looked around, his son twitching violently in his arms, blood pooling on the floor, and all they could see was liability. The doctor waved to the guards. Escort him out before people gather and start filming. This is a hospital, not a theater. Jude couldn't believe it. He wasn't a man anymore, just another burden in their eyes. He kissed Elijah's forehead, stood up on shaky legs, and walked out without another word. The wind howled. The rain slapped his back, and the hospital doors closed behind him like the gates of heaven shutting on the desperate. Jude pressed Elijah tightly against his chest, trying to shield him from the cold. The child whimpered faintly, and that tiny sound kept Jude moving. His legs trembled from exhaustion, and he was soaked to the bone. He wandered for what felt like an hour before spotting a small neon sign, Mercy Care Clinic, open 24 hours. Hope flickered in his chest like a dying ember. It was a modest building, no more than 2 floors high, and though it looked old, it had light, which meant power. He ran toward it, blood dripping from his arms and feet. The waiting room was packed, mostly pregnant women and mothers with toddlers. He barged in screaming, Help! My son needs help now. Everyone turned. The receptionist, a petite woman with glasses, jumped to her feet. What's going on? Jude dropped to his knees. He was shot. He's dying. Please help us. The receptionist rushed to the back to call the matron. An older woman in her 50s appeared, scanning Jude and Elijah from head to toe. Do you have your file here? She asked. Jude shook his head frantically. No, please. We were robbed. They shot him. She narrowed her eyes. So you have no file, no card, no deposit? Jude whispered, No. But I swear, if you save him, I will pay anything. She folded her arms. We don't operate on promises, sir. This is a business. If he dies in our hands, his family might sue. We've seen cases like this before. A few patients murmured in sympathy, but no one intervened. Elijah twitched again. The receptionist whispered, Matron, he's seizing again. But the woman was unmoved. Our doctors are in surgery. Emergency unit is already full. Let him wait or go. Jude stood slowly. His hands were shaking violently now, not from the cold, but from the rising storm inside his chest. This is a child, he said through gritted teeth. A child, not a stray dog. The matron stepped back slightly. And this is a private facility, not a charity home. If you can't pay, leave. We are not responsible for his condition. Jude stared at the ceiling, trying to hold back a scream. Elijah's face was pale now. His breathing was short, shallow, like a candle flickering against wind. Jude turned and faced the crowd. Please, anyone, please help me. Silence. Some turned their heads. Others looked away. No one moved. He took one last look at the matron. May God never let you feel what I feel now. She scoffed. Go and pray somewhere else. Jude turned and walked back into the rain. He didn't even cry this time. His eyes were too dry, too tired, too betrayed by the very world he had once helped build. Jude's body was almost giving up. Every step felt like dragging a mountain behind him. Elijah was now unconscious, his breathing faint. The cold was sinking deep into the boy's bones. Yet something in Jude, call it a father's madness, refused to fall. He saw another hospital sign glowing faintly in the distance. Newbridge Medical Center Emergency Ward. The gate was open. He stumbled inside. The compound was quiet, but had light. He screamed again, emergency. Please. My son is dying. A male nurse heard the shout and ran out. He saw the bloodied man and quickly called others. A young female nurse ran to them. He needs oxygen, she said. But as they were about to lift the child, a voice stopped them. Wait. The voice belonged to a young doctor, maybe in his early 30s. He walked out briskly, brows furrowed. What's going on? The nurse asked. The doctor glanced at Jude. Who is he? Jude was panting. Please. I'm his father. He was shot. He's dying. We were robbed. I have nothing right now. Please help me. The doctor shook his head. ICU is full. The female nurse insisted. We can stabilize him in the minor ward first. He's not breathing well. But the doctor held up a hand. No. We just discharged a case involving a similar situation. We are not taking unknowns, especially ones with no identity. Jude dropped to his knees again. Please. I don't care if he sleeps on the floor. Just save him. The doctor's jaw tightened. You know what lawsuits can do to hospitals in this country? If he dies here, and he's someone important, our license is gone. The nurse looked heartbroken. Doctor, please, he's just a child. The doctor snapped, and I have a hospital to run. He turned and walked back inside. Jude stared at the nurse, pleading. Please. I'm Jude. Jude Okoye. She looked at him confused. The billionaire? He nodded. Yes, please don't tell anyone. Just help my son. The nurse's eyes widened. She stepped back in shock, but before she could react, the door was shut behind her. Jude was left kneeling in the middle of the hospital entrance, soaked, freezing, his son limp in his arms. Not even his name could open the door anymore. He stood, numb, and walked away again. But deep in his heart, he whispered one thing. If my son dies, I will bury this country's silence in fire. The night had swallowed what little strength Jude had left. His bare feet were numb. His soaked clothes clung like iron to his skin, and Elijah's once warm body now felt cold and frighteningly still. Jude was no longer running. He was staggering, stumbling through muddy alleys with a last flicker of hope flickering in his heart like a candle about to go out. His ears were ringing, but then, through the haze of darkness, he saw it, a dim flicker of yellow light spilling out from the crack of an old wooden door. It wasn't bright. It wasn't polished. But it was there. An unmarked clinic, barely a building. Painted walls cracked with time, its signage too faded to read. What caught Jude's attention was the candlelight, real flame, flickering from within. He pushed the door open weakly, whispering, "Please, help." Inside, the clinic was silent, dimly lit by melted wax stubs mounted on empty pill bottles. The faint scent of antiseptic battled the heavier scent of mildew and old books. There was no receptionist, no crowd, just a desk, a rusty fan on the floor, and shelves with worn-out medical kits. Behind the desk was a woman in her early 30s, seated with a stethoscope around her neck, flipping through a torn medical journal. She looked up the moment Jude entered. For a moment, her eyes widened, not in fear, not in disgust, but in immediate understanding. She rose from her seat, knocking the chair backward. "Put him down. Quickly," she commanded, running to clear a makeshift examination table that had once been a student desk. Jude collapsed to his knees beside it, holding Elijah out like a sacred offering. He's been shot," Jude gasped. No one would help. Dr. Chioma didn't ask for payment. She didn't demand ID. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed gloves from a tattered box, sanitized her hands, and began checking Elijah's vitals. He's lost too much blood. Breathing shallow. Entry wound left side. Might have missed the heart, thank God, she muttered. Her tools were few, outdated, but her movements were swift and confident. She tied Elijah's arm, inserted a makeshift foreline, then pressed a bloodied cloth against the wound to control bleeding. You'll need to hold this tightly. Don't let go, she instructed Jude, who obeyed without a word. As she moved between supplies, she lit more candles to keep the light alive. The shadows on the wall danced like ghosts, but inside that little clinic, something sacred was happening. Compassion in its rawest form. For the first time in hours, Jude felt something shift. Not safety, not comfort, but hope. Fragile, flickering hope. The night turned to early dawn, but the outside world didn't notice. Rain continued to fall like punishment. Inside the candlelit clinic, Dr. Chioma worked relentlessly. She cleaned the wound with sterilized salt water, crushed expired antibiotics to create a paste, and applied it with delicate precision. The only sound in the room was Elijah's uneven breathing and Chioma's whispered prayers. Jude, exhausted and trembling, remained glued beside his son, refusing to blink. At times, he feared if he did, Elijah would stop breathing altogether. His pulse is faint but still there, Chioma whispered. We can't move him now. He won't survive the road. Jude nodded. He didn't want to move. He wanted Elijah's breathing, no matter how shallow, to continue. He didn't care if this clinic had no electricity or fancy beds. It had something the others didn't, someone who cared. Dr. Chioma finally sat on the floor, drenched in sweat and soot. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. She didn't ask for his name, not even once. Jude looked at her through bloodshot eyes. Why are you helping us? He asked hoarsely. She looked at Elijah, then back at him. Because that's somebody's child. And I don't need permission to do what's right. Jude's lips quivered. He had never felt more ashamed of his own kind. The hospitals with gates high enough to block out humanity. The doctors who saw risk before life. Here was a woman with nothing, working by candlelight, doing more for his son than an entire city had. He whispered, My name is Mr. J. She nodded slowly. That's enough for me. For a moment, the room fell quiet. Elijah's chest rose and fell, weak but consistent. Jude burst into silent tears. His child was breathing again. Chioma brought him a faded blanket and a cracked mug of warm water. Drink this. You need strength too, she urged. Jude took it with shaking hands. You've been awake all night, he said. She smiled faintly. I've had worse nights. As he sipped the water, Jude finally looked around the room. The clinic was clearly self-funded. The walls were chipped. Equipment was mismatched. Supplies were dwindling. But it was more sacred than any five-star hospital he'd ever built. Jude studied Chioma for a long moment. Her lab coat was stained. Her eyes were tired. But her soul burned like a lighthouse. And in that quiet hour, under flickering candlelight and leaking rooftops, Jude made an unspoken vow. If my son lives, I will not let this woman remain forgotten. She saved my entire world. Hours passed. Elijah remained stable, but unconscious. Chioma insisted on keeping him overnight for observation. Jude sat beside the mattress on the floor, watching his son's chest rise with every breath like a silent miracle. For the first time since the ambush, he allowed himself to breathe too. He reached for Chioma's phone, an old device missing half its screen, and sent one encrypted message to a secure satellite line connected to his offshore assistant. Alive. Injured. Son critical. Do not alert anyone. Observe Raymond and Angela silently. Monitor accounts. He didn't sign the message. Didn't use names. But the recipient would understand. Jude knew he had to disappear for now. He didn't want the world, especially not Raymond or Angela, to know he had survived. If they believed him dead, they would become careless. That was when he would strike. Chioma didn't ask questions. She respected his silence. That night, Jude lay on the bare clinic floor beside Elijah, covering his son with his own jacket. He stared at the flickering ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the leaking roof and the occasional whisper of Chioma's feet checking on Elijah. For once, the silence wasn't terrifying. It was healing. In the morning, he helped her sweep the floor. She offered him a boiled egg and bread, the only food she had left. He ate quietly. When she handed him a warm towel and a worn-out shirt, he hesitated. "You don't even know who I am," he said. "I know your father," she replied. That was enough. Jude stepped outside briefly that morning and saw a newspaper vendor across the road. The headline read, "Billionaire Jude Okoye presumed dead after violent robbery. Body not yet recovered." He stared at it for a long time, then turned back into the clinic. He sat by Elijah again, brushing the boy's wet hair. "They think I'm gone," he whispered. "Let them." He turned to Chioma. "Can I stay a while as I am?" She nodded gently. "You both can stay as long as you need." And so, the richest man in the country, the man whose picture graced magazines, whose signature sealed billionaire deals, now lived in a dim, forgotten clinic powered by candles and kindness. But even in this hidden place, Jude's mind was already working. He wasn't just going to heal. He was going to rise again. And when he did, he would not come back to explain. He would come back to expose. The sky outside remained clouded, as if nature itself refused to move on from the injustice of the previous night. Inside the candlelit clinic, Jude paced slowly while Elijah rested. Though his son was alive, Jude's mind was no longer simply focused on survival. It was racing through images, words, and patterns that now began to align, cracks in conversations, half-truths wrapped in affection, and the perfectly timed nature of the robbery. He recalled that Angela had insisted he attend that charity event alone, knowing Raymond wouldn't be available for security reasons. He thought of how Angela had pressed him that morning about accessing his offshore accounts, in case anything ever happened. At the time, he'd brushed it off as love masked in concern. Now, in the quiet clinic, beneath a rusted ceiling fan and a battered wooden shelf filled with expired antibiotics, the veil lifted. Jude connected the dots. The robbery wasn't random. It was planned, carefully, from the inside. Chioma entered with a bowl of warm water and a fresh cloth. She paused as she saw the storm in Jude's eyes. "He's still stable," she said gently. "Sleeping deeper now, but breathing's even." Jude nodded, but said nothing. His hands clenched tightly. His son's blood hadn't even dried from his own shirt. His knuckles still bore the dirt of the city's heartless roads. And yet, someone who had dined with him, laughed with him, slept in his bed, had plotted this from the shadows. Jude walked over to a dusty radio and adjusted its dial. The static cleared momentarily, revealing a news update. In the wake of billionaire Jude Okoye's suspected death, sources confirmed the board of directors has appointed acting CEO Raymond Diala, his closest friend and business partner. Raymond stated, quote, "It is my duty to continue Jude's legacy in his absence." Jude stared at the radio as the voice droned on, announcing how Angela had been listed as the emergency successor on several personal trust funds. He let out a breath, slow, heavy, and dangerously calm. Chioma watched him closely. She had not pried, not once, into who he truly was. But now she asked softly, "Who did this to you?" Jude looked at her for a long moment. "My best friend, and the woman who kisses my son's forehead every night." Her face stiffened. No gasp. No dramatics. Just the quiet realization that this man had lost more than wealth. He had been stabbed in the soul. She sat beside him, not with pity, but with solidarity. "Whatever you need to do it right," she whispered. Jude nodded. He walked into the side room, picked up Chioma's cracked phone again, and sent another message. "Begin silent observation. Monitor Angela's movements. Follow money transfers. Confirm Raymond's access levels. Do not make contact." As he clicked send, he looked at Elijah, whose lips parted slightly in sleep. Jude spoke under his breath. "You survived, my son. Now I must do the same. But not just to heal, to cleanse." 2 nights later, under the guise of darkness, and with Elijah stabilized under Chioma's watch, Jude slipped out of the clinic in borrowed clothes and a baseball cap. He walked along the silent road until he reached a commercial bike stand and paid double the fare to remain anonymous. The bike took him across town, past billboards bearing his own face. now faded tributes to a man presumed dead. His mansion, once the hub of innovation and philanthropy, now stood eerily lit. But there was life inside, not mourning, not candlelight vigils, but the shimmer of music and movement. Jude instructed the rider to park a few blocks away. He proceeded on foot, keeping low. The gate guards didn't recognize him. Why would they? He looked like a ghost of himself. Worn shoes, stitched shirt, face partially hidden by a surgical mask. He scaled the side wall, avoiding the security camera he himself had installed years ago. It had never occurred to him that one day he'd be sneaking into his own home. From behind the garden hedge, Jude watched the living room through the large glass windows. Angela was in the center, dressed in silk, sipping red wine, laughing with a small group of well-dressed friends. She wasn't wearing black. She wasn't crying. Her face, once the resting place of false affection, now wore the relaxed expression of a woman who had shed all pretense. Jude's stomach turned as he watched her dance lightly to soft music, only pausing to kiss the cheek of one of the male guests, a lawyer he recognized from his advisory board. She had wasted no time. His death was not just assumed, it was celebrated. His son's absence? Unmentioned. His legacy? Being auctioned off in wine-sweetened grins. Jude felt the weight of silence press against his chest. She never loved him. She had only loved his empire, and now that she believed she had it, there was nothing left of the act. As the guests began to disperse, Angela walked into the study. Jude shifted position, scaling the side wall where the guest quarters overlooked the driveway. From the shadows, he watched her speak on the phone. "Yes, I have the files. The originals. Everything you need will be with me at the port tomorrow. I've rented the car, and I'll be gone before the media suspects anything," she said, pacing. Then, after a pause, she smiled softly and added, "I can't wait to see you, baby." Jude clenched his jaw. The tenderness in her voice, the same tone she used to use when holding Elijah at night, was now given to someone else. She ended the call and tucked the documents into a briefcase. Jude quickly climbed back over the fence, his heart pounding not from exertion, but from clarity. It was time to find out exactly who she was meeting at the dock. And if his instincts were correct, the truth would hurt even more than the bullet that almost killed his son. Dawn broke in dull shades of gray, casting a coldness over the city's harbor. Jude had not slept. Disguised once again and using public transport to stay off the grid, he arrived at the dock Angela mentioned. His breath fogged in the morning chill as he hid behind stacked shipping containers, watching from a distance. Boats lined the pier, some for fishing, others for personal use. Security here was minimal. A few dock workers milled about. Then he saw her, Angela, dressed in a sleek black coat and heels, a briefcase clutched tightly in her hand. She kept glancing at her watch and scanning the area. A car pulled up moments later, its engine humming low. The passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. Jude's heart dropped into his stomach. It wasn't just any man, it was Raymond. Raymond looked unbothered, confident, even smug. His hands were in his pockets, and he greeted Angela with the kind of kiss that wasn't new. They embraced like old lovers, not new conspirators. "You look beautiful," Raymond said, pulling her close. "You don't look like someone mourning her billionaire boyfriend." She laughed, flicking her hair. "Well, he's dead. What's left to mourn?" Jude felt bile rise in his throat. From this distance, he could see them clearly. His two closest allies. His family by choice. His legacy was nothing more than an inheritance they wanted to divide and escape with. Angela handed over the briefcase. "These are the real deeds. With this, we can start fresh anywhere," she said. Raymond opened it and smiled. "You've done well, Angie." Jude took out his phone silently. He didn't call. He recorded. Every word. Every glance. Every lie. As Angela stepped back into the car, Raymond looked out at the horizon, hands behind his back like a prince surveying his kingdom. Jude's phone continued to record from his concealed perch. He didn't move. He didn't shout. Not yet. His revenge would not be loud and messy. It would be slow, precise, just like theirs. He would take back everything, not just his name or wealth, but their sense of power. Let them believe they were safe. Let them believe he was dead. Because the dead can do one thing the living cannot: haunt. And Jude Okoye, the man they buried too early, was going to haunt them both until the day they begged for silence. Jude returned to the clinic long before the sun fully rose, his heart a furnace of silent rage. Chioma was already awake, sitting beside Elijah's bed, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. She looked up the moment he stepped in, and instantly sensed something had changed. He was no longer the trembling, desperate father who stumbled in carrying his dying child. He had become something else entirely. A man not just fueled by love, but by betrayal. A man with nothing to lose and everything to expose. Jude gently knelt beside Elijah, stroking his son's forehead. His breathing was still shallow, but steady. "He fought all night," Chioma whispered. "This boy is not going anywhere. Not with you by his side." Jude didn't reply at first. Instead, he reached into his pocket and retrieved a small USB drive. "I recorded everything," he said softly. "Angela, Raymond, the port, the briefcase. They think I'm dead. Let's keep it that way." For the next several hours, Jude sat on the floor beside Elijah, eyes closed, but his mind sharp. He had already sent the files to his personal assistant abroad, a quiet, brilliant woman named Ifeanyi, who had managed many of his sensitive operations. He coded the message simply: activate umbrella protocol, document retrieval, freeze transfers under authority 6A, leak nothing. He knew Ifeanyi would act without a second thought. Jude had built his empire carefully, but also secretly. He had backdoors into systems, safes with dual password protections, and legal clauses even Raymond didn't know existed. Still, this wasn't about money anymore. It was about betrayal. It was about looking into the eyes of people who called you brother or baby, while they plunged knives into your back. He wasn't just going to take back what was his. He was going to make sure they lost everything they gained through evil. Chioma watched him silently. She had long since guessed that Mr. J was no ordinary man, but she didn't ask. Instead, she brought him warm food and gently reminded him to eat. She cleaned Elijah's wound again, checking for signs of infection. "He's responding better now," she murmured, placing a cool cloth on his head. "His pulse is stronger than yesterday." Jude's eyes softened. "Thank you, Chioma, for all of this." She waved him off. "Thank me when your son is walking again." He stood up and faced her directly. "I don't think you know what you've done," he said. "You didn't just save a boy. You saved a man who will make sure the world never forgets what you did." Chioma smiled faintly. "If you want to repay me, keep being a father. That's the greatest currency I know." Jude turned back to Elijah, but in his mind, he wasn't just building revenge. He was preparing legacy. The next few days were a quiet storm of strategy. Jude remained in hiding, using Chioma's tiny clinic as both shelter and war room. While Elijah rested peacefully in the adjacent room, Jude worked from Chioma's old laptop, retrofitted with one of his portable secure drives. He wore earphones to listen to audio from the dock, transcribing each word Angela and Raymond spoke. Every detail mattered. He plotted their movements with GPS pings, tracked their shell company affiliations, and unearthed financial trails buried in foreign accounts. What Raymond didn't know, and would soon regret, was that Jude had built many of those offshore channels himself. With Ifeanyi's help, he initiated quiet audits, froze accounts linked to suspicious movements, and rerouted documents to investigators under his alias. His fingerprints were nowhere. His name remained dead. But behind the curtain, he was orchestrating a financial noose, one that tightened silently. One night, as rain drizzled again over the clinic roof, Jude uncovered a key file, a rental agreement for the car Angela had used at the port. The signatory? A man named Chukwudiala, Raymond's cousin. It was the final piece of proof that tied Raymond to the robbery. The car's GPS logs had conveniently been wiped, but not before Jude's offshore cybersecurity team captured backup data from a cloud sync. The dots now formed a perfect circle. Raymond had rented the car, Angela had carried the forged documents, and the hired robbers had left Jude and Elijah to die. He clicked on one last link. A photo of the same cousin depositing stolen company stock certificates at a private bank abroad. Jude stared at the screen, his jaw tight. "You dug a grave for me," he muttered, "but forgot I taught you how to bury things." While Jude built his silent case, Chioma continued to serve the patients that wandered into her clinic. The poor, the broken, the forgotten. She refused the new money Jude anonymously funneled in through medical donors. "Why are all these things suddenly showing up?" she asked one morning as a solar inverter was delivered. Jude smiled vaguely. "Maybe the world is watching now," he replied. But Chioma didn't press. She trusted his silence. And so the clinic began to transform piece by piece. New bedding, medical supplies, a working fridge. Jude didn't say it aloud, but he had already decided. This clinic would become the heart of something bigger, a new kind of hospital, built not with bureaucracy, but with mercy. The kind of place that saved him and his son when all the giants of medicine turned them away. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was rebirth. The morning Elijah opened his eyes again was the morning the entire clinic felt reborn. Jude had fallen asleep on the floor, his head beside Elijah's mattress, when he felt tiny fingers brush his beard. "Daddy," came the faint, cracked voice. Jude sat up, heart hammering, eyes wide. Elijah's eyes blinked slowly, unfocused but alive. "Daddy, I had a dream. You were crying." Jude pulled him into his arms, sobbing for the first time, without shame. "I cried, my boy," he whispered. "But not anymore. Not now." Chioma entered moments later, caught between medical caution and pure joy. "He's awake," she said, blinking tears. She checked his vitals again, her touch tender. "You're a strong boy," she said softly to Elijah. "You made it through fire." The boy smiled weakly. "Are you my angel?" She laughed. "Not quite. Just your doctor." News of Elijah's miraculous recovery spread, especially when Jude anonymously posted a blurred image of a father and son, no names, no details, holding hands under candlelight with the caption, "One woman with no tools saved a life when the world shut its doors. What is your excuse?" Within 24 hours, the post went viral. Influencers reshared it. Activists reposted it. Donations flooded in, all directed toward Dr. Chioma's community clinic. Major hospitals began to take notice. Some congratulated her publicly while trying to cover their own shame. Journalists reached out, but Chioma refused interviews. "Let the work speak," she told Jude. But he knew she deserved more. Behind the scenes, he instructed his legal team to begin purchasing the land next to the clinic. The plan: build the city's first emergency treatment center for the uninsured, in Chioma's name. That night, as candles flickered once again in the now cleaned and stocked clinic, Jude stood outside with Chioma, watching the rain fall gently over the rooftops. "The world is about to know who you are," he said. She shook her head. "Let them know about the boy. Let them know that a child lived." Jude turned to her, deeply serious. "You didn't just save my son. You saved me. If you hadn't opened that door," his voice cracked. "Then let's make sure no door closes again," she replied. In that moment, they stood not just as doctor and father, but as survivors of a cruel world. Two people who believed that even in the darkest nights, a single candle could burn brighter than all the neon signs money could buy. Jude watched Elijah sleep peacefully that night, and made a vow that would burn in his heart until justice was fully served. Jude had always believed in planning, not just the kind that built empires, but the kind that outlived betrayal. While Elijah's recovery became a quiet miracle within the walls of Chioma's clinic, Jude's network spread like unseen roots beneath the soil. Every hospital that denied him was documented. Every insult, every refusal to save his son without a deposit, all captured with dates, locations, and witness statements. His offshore team, led by Ifeanyi, quietly compiled a dossier titled "The Price of Neglect." It detailed how greed, bureaucracy, and inhumanity had nearly claimed a child's life. This wasn't just personal anymore. Jude was beginning to see a wider pattern, one that afflicted the voiceless, the nameless, the poor. His case was unique not because it happened, but because he survived to tell it. And now, he planned to speak in ways that no one could ignore. The legal groundwork began in the shadows. Court petitions were prepared under pseudonyms. 3 hospitals had already received anonymous queries from the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria, prompting panic behind closed doors. Simultaneously, Jude arranged for a series of small grants to be awarded to Chioma's clinic, not from him directly, but from medical reform NGOs he quietly funded. Chioma didn't ask questions, but her eyes carried a silent gratitude when a brand new solar inverter arrived with the label donated by a friend of justice. At night, after tucking Elijah into his creaky bed, Jude would sit by the clinic window, watching the distant city lights flicker, a city where his enemies drank wine, unaware that the man they buried was already laying the foundation for their fall. He wrote in a journal Chioma gifted him. They took my identity, but now I wear their silence as my weapon. Elijah's strength returned faster than anyone expected. Within a week, he was standing. By the end of the second week, he was walking slowly, holding onto Jude's hand with quiet determination. Chioma wept the first time she saw him take 3 full steps without wobbling. Your son is going to live a long, powerful life, she whispered. Jude smiled but remained solemn. Yes, and the people who tried to kill that life will answer for it. As Elijah slept beside him that night, Jude opened his encrypted app again and typed, "Proceed to Phase 3. Track Raymond's overseas holdings. Confirm travel plans. Begin asset lock." Ifeanyi replied in seconds. Flight booked for Kenya. Holdings in Dubai, Accra, and Mauritius confirmed. Waiting for your signal. Jude stared at the screen, then at his son. Not yet, he whispered. Let them relax a little more. Let them build their future on quicksand. It started with a man named Tunji, one of the armed robbers. He had been caught trying to cash a stolen corporate check linked to one of Jude's dummy companies. The bank's internal system flagged the name immediately, thanks to the alerts Jude's team had set in motion. By the time Tunji stepped outside the banking hall, 2 plainclothes officers had already begun tailing him. He was picked up that night, trembling, high on cheap pills, unaware that he had just triggered a nationwide investigation. At first, he gave the usual story. I just found the check. But under pressure and the temptation of early release, he revealed details that aligned with what Jude already knew. We were told to make it messy, but clean. The boss said no names. Just take the money, the man's phones, his car, rough him up a bit, and disappear. When asked who gave the job, Tunji hesitated, then murmured, a guy named Chuka. He drives a Lexus. Said his cousin wanted to disappear someone big. That name, Chuka Diala, was all the police needed. Though they didn't know the full depth of the case, Jude had already provided a quiet nudge through a legal associate who tipped off the Inspector General's office anonymously. Chuka was arrested 2 days later at a club in Lekki, dancing like a man who didn't know the world beneath his feet was collapsing. His phone was seized, and in it were voice notes, photographs, and conversations that linked him directly to Raymond. The most damning message was a forwarded video clip Chuka had saved, bodycam footage one of the robbers had taken, showing Elijah bleeding in the car. That footage had never been made public. Jude watched it in silence when his legal team sent him the file. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just downloaded it onto 3 flash drives and placed one in a safe, one in his personal vault, and one in Chioma's hands. If anything happens to me, he said, you release this. She nodded, stunned by the weight of what she held. The news broke quietly at first. One arrested in connection to robbery of missing billionaire Jude Okoye. The media didn't have the full story yet. But within 24 hours, chatter increased. Anonymous tips circulated. Bloggers hinted at insider betrayal. Raymond, meanwhile, called a press conference to reassure shareholders, saying the board was cooperating fully with law enforcement. Angela posted an Instagram photo in a white dress, captioned, "Fresh starts. New beginnings." Jude smiled when he saw it. Yes, Angela, he muttered. Fresh starts always come after the fall. The clinic remained quiet, a temple of secrets and rising miracles. Jude looked at Elijah, playing with a donated toy, and whispered, "The first domino has fallen." and they still think I'm not here to watch it all collapse. The next move was not legal. It was emotional. Jude knew the world didn't move for lawsuits. It moved for stories. For faces. For pain it could see and feel. And so he contacted a trusted friend in media, someone he'd helped in the past, a journalist named Kelechi who had been fired once for exposing corruption. Jude met him in an underground cafe at midnight, hooded and unrecognizable. "I want you to tell a story," Jude said. Kelechi's eyes lit up. "Whose story?" Jude slid over a flash drive. A father, a son, and the hospitals that closed their doors while a child bled in the rain. Kelechi hesitated. "Are you?" Jude raised a hand. "Don't name me. Just tell the truth." That night, Kelechi uploaded the video. Blurry footage of Jude carrying Elijah, banging on hospital gates, screaming into the rain. Overlaid were voiceovers from anonymous nurses who had whispered the truth. "They told us not to touch him, said he was nobody, said he'd bring legal trouble." The video exploded across Nigeria within 12 hours. It was raw, real, devastating. People wept openly watching the child convulsing in his father's arms. Activists rallied. Civil societies issued statements. The Nigerian Medical Association released a hurried press memo. No hospital should ever prioritize profit over life. But it was too late. The names of the hospitals leaked. A protest began outside the first one, blocking entrances. Doctors were booed. One resigned live on radio. Within 48 hours, Chioma's clinic received over 40 million Nigerian nairas in anonymous donations. Supplies, food, and even a second nurse showed up, unpaid, just to help. She turned no one away. Still, Chioma refused to give interviews. "This is not about me," she said. But Jude knew it was. It was about her. It was about the boy who lived. It was about the woman with candles and courage who did what the giants refused to. Angela saw the video too. She stood frozen in her living room, eyes glued to the screen, wine glass falling from her fingers. Her smile was gone. Her skin paled. Raymond barged in moments later, holding his phone. "He's alive," he said, breathless. "That's him. That's Jude. That was the night," Angela whispered. "Then he knows everything," Raymond nodded. "And if he's alive, we're finished." They stared at the screen together as the final words of the broadcast rang out. This is not just a story about a billionaire. It is a story about a father, and about a country that nearly let his child die because he had no wallet in his hand. But the man they ignored is back, and he's watching. Across the city, Jude sat beside Elijah and smiled. "Now," he whispered, "the whole world sees what silence nearly buried." The boardroom of Jude's former company was filled with tension on the day of the emergency meeting. Raymond, dressed in a crisp gray suit, stood confidently at the head of the long marble table, flanked by lawyers and advisors. Angela, seated with a faux calm on her face, scrolled idly through her phone, acting unbothered. Several shareholders had flown in after seeing the viral broadcast. Though Jude's name hadn't been directly mentioned, many were beginning to suspect that the father in the rain was none other than their missing founder. Raymond had prepared a statement to dismiss rumors and reassert control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I understand the emotional impact of the circulating footage. But I assure you, our internal investigation confirms no link between the incident and Mr. Okoye." He paused, allowing his tone to drip with fabricated sorrow. "Jude was my brother. I would never." The doors burst open. Every head turned. Silence sliced through the room like a blade. Jude Okoye walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He didn't need one. Clad in a simple navy blue kaftan, the man presumed dead for nearly a month stood tall, gone from his ordeal, but radiating a calm authority that needed no announcement. Raymond froze. Angela gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. One of the shareholders whispered, "It's him." Jude walked to the head of the table directly across from Raymond and slowly dropped a flash drive onto the table. "Play it," he said. A technician rushed forward, fumbling to connect it. The room darkened as the projector lit up the far wall. For the next 4 minutes, the boardroom became a courtroom. Raymond and Angela watched themselves on screen at the dock, embracing, exchanging documents, speaking in the very voices they had once reserved for deceit. No one interrupted. When the lights came back on, Jude looked directly at Raymond. "You didn't just try to steal my life," he said quietly. "You almost buried my son." Angela stood up, shaking. "Jude." "I didn't mean." Jude raised a hand to silence her. "Save it for the police." As if on cue, two plainclothes officers entered the room, nodding at Jude. He motioned to them calmly. "Take them." Raymond lunged for his phone. Angela screamed. Cameras flashed. Investors rose in chaos. The betrayal that had begun in whispered messages ended in handcuffs. As they were dragged from a room, Jude turned to the shareholders. "This company will no longer be run by shadows," he declared. "And as of today, a percentage of every quarterly profit will go to building emergency clinics across the country, so no father has to choose between dignity and desperation." He walked out without waiting for applause. He wasn't there for validation. He was there to finish what had begun in blood and rain. Weeks passed. Angela and Raymond's faces graced every front page. Disgraced lovers, corporate thieves, and would-be murderers. The trial became a national conversation. Jude never attended. He issued only one statement: "Let justice speak. I've said enough." Instead, he focused on Elijah, who had now returned home, healthier and louder than ever. The boy had begun drawing again, always pictures of candles, stars, and a woman in a white coat. When asked why, Elijah would smile and say, "Because she gave me light when everywhere else was dark." Chioma continued her work at the clinic, though it no longer looked like the place Jude had first entered. The once broken walls had been replaced. The beds were new. A second nurse had been hired, then a third. But she hadn't changed. She still took in patients no one else wanted. She still treated with her hands and her heart. Then came the day Jude invited her to a private land unveiling. She assumed it was another donation event. Instead, when she arrived, she found herself standing before a massive banner, the Elijah Foundation Hospital, in honor of Dr. Chioma Nwankwo. Her knees buckled. She stared at the modern structure rising from the red earth, 3 stories, solar-powered, equipped with an emergency wing and neonatal ICU. Jude stood beside her, smiling. "You built it," she said, stunned. He shook his head. "No, you did. The world just needed to catch up." Reporters tried to swarm her, but Jude shielded her. "One photo," he said gently. "Just one for history." That evening, the image went viral. A boy holding his father's hand, both standing beside a doctor who once worked by candlelight, now framed by floodlights of a future she never imagined. Back at home, Jude tucked Elijah into bed. The boy clutched his new stethoscope toy, a gift from Chioma. "Daddy, are you okay now?" he asked. Jude kissed his forehead. "I am. Because you are." He walked to the window, staring out at the stars. He thought of the hospitals that turned him away. He thought of the friends who traded his life for comfort. He thought of the boy who bled in his arms, and the woman who refused to let him die. And he knew deep within his soul that his wealth was no longer in numbers. It was in mercy, in memory, and in the miracle that rose from the dirt. The candle that saved his son had become a fire. And this time, the world would feel its warmth. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.